Alrighty. Is that on? That is on. Okay. All right. Let's jump in for today. I love to ask questions. Too dark. Okay. And then I'll prove to you that I'm not new at this because I can anticipate what the questions that will appear are going to be. First question one of you is going to ask is, what was the class average? The class average was 35.12 out of 45 for basically exactly 78%. Now that said, I have not put in, so people who wrote on paper on that day and people who wrote in accommodations, I have not marked them yet. So once I put those in, that may shift slightly up or down, but it should stay pretty close to there. It usually doesn't go too far. Question the second, which I anticipate you want to see your exams. So there's going to be some question, how can you see your exams? All right, so as of next Tuesday, I'm going to be around the whole day on Tuesday, basically. So I will, put a post on eClass, an announcement telling you when you can come in and see it. But basically next Tuesday for most of the day, maybe with the exception of from 1 to 2 when I need a slight break for lunch, you can come and take a look at your exams, and then probably next Friday as well after this class, so after 1 o'clock until like 3:30, 4 o'clock, depending on how many people come. And I don't release the exams on eClass because that ends up with people just copying down all the questions and posting them. And I'm trying to protect it as much as possible. I know nothing's perfect, but you want to come and take a look. You can do that on Tuesday or Friday of next week, and I'll make sure to post in announcements what everything is. Am I taking any questions off the midterm? Oh, Cheburashka, Soviet Mickey Mouse. Yes, for those wondering what my profile picture is on YouTube, it is a Soviet creation called Cheburashka. He was kind of like the Mickey Mouse of the Soviet Union. He's adorable. Do I play video games? Only Monday through Fridays and on weekends. Now, to be fair, I'm not very good. I've been playing Rocket League with my 11-year-old, and he tells me I stink, which is true, which aggravates him to no end when I made Plat before he did. So there's that. So yes, I play some. I don't play much, and I like to play games that are 5 minutes, like very short play time, so I can play them for a few minutes and then go back to life. My 11-year-old was trying to convince me that Fortnite is a good idea, but I'm entirely not sold on this game. It seems really silly. What does that mean? uh, those are words, but what words are they? Um, such. Yeah, I think. I thought I had it going. Yes. Oh, no, I named it the right thing. It's there. Live stream is there. Um, I can't. Obviously, if you can't see the live stream, I can't tell you. Can someone type in there? Yes, the live stream is going for this person. Because I actually cannot. I can't see it. I can't communicate with them, but yes, the live stream is going. Okay, perfect. Thank you kindly. I'm not going to ponder what this. Oops, I cleared the wrong comment. PC rules over everything. Sure. I don't know what this means. All right, I'm very confused. Okay, am I taking any questions off the midterm? As I go through it, it depends on if it looks like there's any bad questions. So as people come in, usually I discover them. I'll take a look at the statistics today. I didn't have a chance on Wednesday, and yesterday I was marking stuff for another class. Oh God, no. Come on. I do not. Okay, so you have to have 1,000 subscribers to monetize your YouTube, and I think I'm up to 148, which I wouldn't monetize it anyway because I just use it for students to put my lectures on a platform that actually works because the platforms the university offers us suck. So that's the only reason it's on YouTube. And no, I don't monetize, so I don't make any money off of streaming my lectures, which sounds like a nice side hustle, but I wouldn't do that. So, okay, let's talk about socialization. Can we stop talking about furries now? No, never. We'll talk about furries forever. That is who we are now. That is part of your identity. You are now someone who talks about furries. Just accept it and embrace a fursona. You'll be good. Okay. All right. So socialization, right? So socialization, basically, when we talk about it in the context of sociology, is the process of taking, unformed people, typically babies, and teaching them the rules, norms, values of a society, right? So you basically, like, socialization is turning, subjects into people, essentially. Now, this question of, how important is socialization in the process of essentially becoming human, is something that goes back really into the beginnings of the field in the 18th and 19th centuries, when people were trying to understand, how social norms and values are communicated from one generation to another in this kind of scientific way that sociology aspires to, right? And so one of the things that people kind of figured out through a bunch of sort of weird examples, is that, yeah, socialization is not only a process that people go through, but it's a sort of time bound one, right? It's one that basically is very important and it's very contingent on kind of like very linked to biological development in major ways. So one of the kind of early examples, and we have later examples of this as well, is this guy, Victor the Savage of Aveyron, who was basically a young person who was found essentially abandoned in the woods in France. And basically was taken in by an enterprising group of scientists who realized that this person, basically had not been given any kind of emotional care, and basically abused as a child, and had not been taught things like reading, how to speak, how to feel, how to make connections with people, or any of the normal kind of human processes. And so they basically took him in and tried to, see if they could then socialize this person who'd never been socialized, right? And it never really worked, right? Never, Victor never mastered speech, right? Didn't develop any emotional bonds with anyone but his immediate caregivers, right? And basically, we've seen this experiment kind of replicated in multiple spheres over a couple of centuries, right? Very famously, right, institutional childcare facilities for abandoned children, right, orphanages, right? The reason, say, in North America, that we don't have orphanages as institutions anymore is because when it comes to socialization, they don't work very well, right? And we have examples, say, of big institutional orphanages in places like Romania after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism. Western scholars kind of got to go in there, and what they found was that there were these, rooms where people, desperate people would leave their babies in these orphanages, and babies would be left to cry and cry and cry and not given effective care, right? So they would stop crying, right? They'd basically realize that crying doesn't get your needs met, so they would stop crying, and then when people went over, well-meaning people went over to, say, Romania to adopt children, usually Western couples who couldn't have children, they would bring these babies from, say, Romanian or Russian orphanages back to their homes. And in a lot of cases, they encountered major behavioral problems, or they would bring them back, right? Because these babies didn't act like people expected babies to act. Something was missed in socialization, right? They wouldn't cry. And certainly during the first few years of life, and if you miss whatever neural structure development happens from this emotional care, you can't get it back, right? It's not something where, later on you can give a 3-year-old that emotional care that they should have had as a baby and you can rebuild those neurons or anything like that. It just never, ever happens, right? They'll never develop normal emotional functioning. So, like I said, this is why we don't have orphanages in North America really anymore, right? That's why a foster care system that puts, children who are in need in people's homes ended up becoming the norm, because this big institutional system where there were dozens or hundreds of kids that the staff couldn't properly care for or give enough emotional support to, simply left people, made people that were emotionally and intellectually stunted in major ways. So the process of becoming human is a very social one. It starts really, after you're born, and if anything is missed or interrupted, you never really get it back for the most part, especially in those early years. Okay. Yeah. So socialization, the process by which people learn to function in social life and become aware of themselves, as they interact with others, right? So it's where you become a person in society, right? You learn the rules of society. Um, you become aware of yourself as what sociologists would call a social subject, right? Someone who lives in society, and you do this by interacting with other people. And yeah, so basically, a couple of ways that this happens. We do this all throughout our lives, and I think important to remember that the process of socialization is never entirely complete, right? That you're going to be socialized until well into the time that you're in a nursing home and your children don't visit you anymore, or hopefully that's not the case. Maybe you're euthanized and ground up into Soylent Green and fed to the next generation, right? Sorry, that's the plot of a '70s movie called Soylent Green. Charlton Heston running around saying Soylent Green is people. It's kind of gross when you think about it. But you're basically being socialized, right up until the moment that you die, right? Because you're in social roles. And so what do, right? Basically, you engage and disengage in particular social roles as you move into spaces, as you move into different parts of your life, and as you take on different roles that need to be taken on, right? So, right, when you go to, when you're a preschooler, right, you basically are being socialized principally in the family. We'll talk about that in a second. It's called primary socialization, right? And your roles mostly relate to you and your parents and maybe siblings, right? When you move into school, right, you take on another role and you have to be taught another role, right? So you take on the role of student, right? And you have these people who are called teachers. And as you enter that role, right, you learn the norms of being in school, right? That's why kindergarten and preschool are there, right? It's not so much like preschool is less about teaching people any particular information. It's more about teaching them how to be, right? How to be in a classroom, how to be in that authority relationship. Same thing with kindergarten, right? You learn a few things in kindergarten. The kindergarten teachers will probably get mad at me for saying this. I'm sorry, but mostly it's about learning how to be in that space, right? How to be a student. As you move through, through life, you learn other roles, right? You become, an older student, so you take on more responsibilities. You become a teenager. You become, a university student. Maybe you're in sixth grade. You get to be a monitor for a class. You move in and out of these roles, and you learn the norms of these roles as you move through life. You get into romantic relationships, right? All of these things, you're being socialized, and you're learning through various sources how to do all of these things. And yeah, you become aware of yourself as you interact with other people, right? You sort of learn about the roles you're going to take on and who you are and how you relate to those roles by your interactions with other people. Okay, so, oh, yeah, it's continued social interaction that allows infants to develop ultimately a self image or a sense of self, right? Nobody is ultimately born with a sense of self or with an identity. It develops over time as you interact with the world, at least that's what sociologists say, right? And the self, what is the self, right? It is your ideas and attitudes about who you are as an independent being. And what's interesting about the self, we tend to think of the self as a relatively stable thing, right? Like who you are, you have your memories. It's if you look at the psychological literature, the self is actually a much more dynamic, thing than we tend to think. You're always kind of rewriting who you think you are based on what kind of roles you find yourself in life. Okay, we're going to talk about my least favorite person in the entire canon of sociological and psychological literature, Sigmund Freud, because he's German. I have to do it in a German accent. Freud. Usually, I would like to caveat everything I say about Freud with the fact that he was a pseudoscientific hack who came up with a bunch of ideas that are widely discredited now. But fundamentally, some of our ideas about the self do owe a debt to Herr Sigmund. So we will. That's the worst German accent in the world. All right. Um, so we'll talk about him for a sec. Okay, so Freud, in a lot of ways, proposed one of the first models of the self, right? And basically, and the process by which the self ultimately emerges, right? And what did Freud say? Basically, that it's through social interaction that the self emerges, right? And basically, it's for Freud, a lot of it is in the boundary setting that people put in, right? Um, with children that sets their children, um, and the learning to control those basic impulses that the self ultimately emerges. Okay. Ah, yes, I did know. I don't know how that's pertinent, but yes, Ceausescu was murdered on live television by firing squad on Christmas Day. He like tried to escape, and he was just hunted down by Romanian people. Okay. Oops. I don't know what I cleared there. I think I could take 100 kindergartners in a cage match. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go there. I've been working out. Uh, is there a chance anyone's grades will decrease if I take questions off the midterm? No, the only thing I wouldn't actually delete the question. What I would do typically is either make a second response correct, or I would make all the responses correct if the question is just really bad. So very much, ah, very much your grade can only go up. There is a slight chance, right? The only way that your grade would go down is if there's a question that's clearly miskeyed. I might rekey it. That is a possibility. It almost never happens. I almost only ever make things multiple answer if there's something screwed up. Okay. Okay. Are the roles that I'm speaking of regarding age based on Erickson's stages of development? Yeah, Erickson is Erickson's a psychologist. Erik Erikson, whose parents are so creative in their naming. Um, he's a psychologist, and he has these developmental stages as well. They're not necessarily. I'm not necessarily making direct reference to Erikson here, but it's a kind of similar theory, right? Just from a sociological perspective. Could I explain the boundary part again? Okay, so basically, the idea that Freud has is like civilization, right? To civilize people, you put in boundaries, right? Things that you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Like, and my connection has been lost. Cool. Someone's playing Fortnite in the back. That's what's happening. I don't know. Okay. Sorry. Let me check if there's any other questions. No. I'll just flick back and forth to really confuse everyone. No, I'm kidding. I'm in a weird mood. It's Friday. It's my last class of the day. It's all good. And then I'm going to go back to my office and mark like the devil himself. Okay. So I just hit my step count just now because my wrist is buzzing. Everything's coming up, Jeff. All right. So, the formation of the self, according to Charles Horton Cooley, Cooley comes up with this idea that he calls the looking glass self, right? And basically, what he's suggesting is that the way that people come to a sense of self is sort of like looking in a mirror, kind of, but the mirror is other people. Okay, so basically, what Cooley says is that we interact with, when we interact with others, right? And starting when you're a baby, right? You do things and people react to you. They gesture, they react to you. And this, for Cooley, what Cooley says is this allows us to understand what those people, excuse me, I got the hiccups. This allows us to understand what we look like to those people, right? So basically other people act as a sort of mirror for us, right? So when you're a baby and you do something funny, right? What funny thing do babies do, right? You try to make a bunch of sound. There's that one video, they have the kid in the snowsuit and it's like blah 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 blah, right? It's funny, right? And so people laugh. And so the baby is like, "Oh, I'm funny. That makes people laugh. It makes them happy." Right? That's how I appear to them when I do this. I appear funny, right? So they act as a sort of mirror. It's like I see their reaction to me and what I'm doing, and so that's what I am, right? So if you do something, that's not allowed, something bad, right, and they react to you negatively by putting you in a timeout, you see that in their eyes, that action, that thing that you did was bad, right? So we judge how people are evaluating us based on their reactions. And Cooley thinks this happens like really from like infancy, right? As you do things, you judge how people are reacting to you, and you try to do more of the things that are positive and fewer of the things that are negative, right? But from those reactions, you develop a self-concept or a set of feelings and ideas about who you are. So this kind of idea is really big if you think about things like the self-esteem movement, right? the idea, and again, it will end up playing out in society in kind of weird and interesting ways. In the 1980s, there was this big movement around self-esteem, right? Based on this idea that kids were going to think about who they were based on how adults were reacting to them. So that in the sorry, in the 1980s, I thought about a book. I'll tell you in a sec. In the 1980s, right, there was a big push on trying to give a ton of praise to kids about how they were doing, right? This is where you get participation trophies, right? You lost the sport ball tournament, but you get a participation trophy or medal anyway, just for participating, because we don't want you to feel bad about yourself. And by the conclusion that you're the one team that didn't get a sport ball medal, you feel bad about yourself and you start to think you suck, right? This is the kind of theory that goes into it. Now, as it turns out, Jean Twenge talks about the millennials who were particularly subjected to this kind of way of thinking as the narcissist generation or generation me, because they developed they were praised so much that they developed such an overwhelming sense of self-confidence that didn't match their actual abilities in the world. But this is Cooley in a nutshell, right? If you're treated like you're special, you're a super special snowflake number 954, and there's no other super special snowflake like you're going to think that you're special in some way. And so you build a sense that you have this identity as a super special person, right? Who's totally unique, unlike everybody else, and is perfect just the way you are. This is Cooley, in a nutshell. You tell people something about themselves, or you react to them in a particular way, right? They lose the sport ball tournament. You're like, yay, you're amazing. People will start to think they're amazing, right? Or if you're constantly berating and punishing a child, they're going to think that they suck, right? They're going to develop a self-image based on how you treat them because they're like, wow, my parent thinks I'm terrible. There you go, right? That's how it goes. Did the live stream disconnect? It's possible. I had an internet blippity doo, so I can't tell if everything's working, but it seems like it's working. It says streaming, so I'm going to go with yes. I don't know. We'll go from there. I can always provide you with past lectures if something. Did I like when Drake was trending? Drake was trending? Uh, See, I spent my whole evening last night not only listening to a 2-hour interview with Vladimir Putin, which was fascinating and distressing, but also then watching all of the memes about Vladimir Putin pop up. And they were honestly, people were having such a good time with it. Like in trying to explain why he ordered the invasion of Ukraine, he went back to like the year 800. It was kind of awesome. But like it's wonky history, like it's totally whack. But then people were posting like all these funny memes of Putin trying to explain things to people. It's like, you want to know about the American Civil War? Let me take you back to 446 and the invasion of the Saxons and all this kind of stuff, right? So I was having a good time. I didn't notice Drake was trending, but the Putin interview and more the reaction to the Putin interview was super amusing. People joking like, we must go back to the first age of Mordor to explain, why Gandalf sent 2 hobbits into Mordor with the One Ring. Anyway, funny stuff. If you're into like politics, it was hilarious. Um, I don't like Drake. I'm sorry. I'm just too old. I don't get it. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, millennials. Well, according to Jean Twenge, they were the narcissist generation, especially the older millennials, of which I am one. And I, gotta say, legit thought I was pretty special. So maybe there's something to that. I try to keep up with pop culture, but there's just too much of it. Okay, duly noted. I take it now that it was something bad. I'm now just going to assume that it was something sexual. So Drake is now, let's me too him. That's what we're going to do. Okay. Anyway, is Cooley's theory similar to Mead's? All right. I had fun times. Let's get back on topic. Is Cooley's theory similar to Mead's? Yeah, I mean, in some ways, right? Let's talk about Mead because Mead's on the next slide. Okay. So Mead's idea here is a little bit different than Cooley's, right? So Cooley has this idea, right, of the looking glass self, that we're just establishing ourselves in comparison to other people, right? And specifically their reactions. Mead sort of is a little bit more Freudian in a sense, in the way that he sort of posits a split self, right? Because very famously, Freud had this idea that your psyche was split into the id, the ego, and the superego, which are all terms that he made up, by the way. And I can never remember which is which, and I'm not going to bother trying because it's pseudoscience anyway, so let's not worry about it. But Mead has this kind of not quite dualist notion of the self, but definitely a divided self, right? And a sense that the self emerges in a particular way, right? So basically, the self sort of starts, he thinks, with a sense of what he calls the I, right? And the I is the impulsive aspect of the self, right? I think that in Freud's kind of lingo, that would be the ego or the superego, though I can't exactly remember. But basically, it is the self that is focused entirely on its own needs, right? And it's impulsive, um, and it's present from birth, right? So it's like I want this, right? Because babies, like think of a baby. What do babies? They want stuff, right? They want food, they want comfort, they want their diaper changed. As they get older, they want all the toys. Um, you know, if you've met any toddlers, you know that anything within their distinct visual range belongs to them, and they will fight other toddlers to the death to take possession of it. So it's this very impulsive self that wants stuff, right? Now, what Mead thinks is that as language emerges, right, you get a sort of self that emerges as you start to talk and develop a sense of others, right? And and you can conceptualize things that are outside of yourself. So he calls this the me, right? Like the sense of a person that isn't just this kind of like animalistic desire that the I is, right? So you learn to talk about yourself, talk about who you are, talk about what your needs are, what you want, start to think about other people, right, as subjects, right? Really interestingly, or maybe not, I don't know, I think it's interesting. I was reading that they've done these studies of babies, and a lot of babies' first word is dad, right? Or papa or dada or whatever. And one of the theories behind why this is, even though they spend much more time with their mothers, is because, babies at first don't consider their mother as a separate being, right? They are sort of connected to it in a very viscerally physical way. And so they don't consider their mother a separate being. And it's only later that they start to consider mom a separate being at all. Dad emerges first as a separate being as they start to develop language, right? And this is the me, right? You start to see yourself as one being and other people as other beings, and you start to put that into words and develop a sense of what does it mean to be, little Caitlin or whatever it happens to be, right? And that's, but it can only develop through language. It's not inherent in, a non-linguistic kind of being. Okay, I gotta explain that. I don't know what mad freaky means. Okay, alrighty. So this one's probably important. So let's spend a little time with it. So Mead thinks that there's basically stages of development and role taking, right? And basically they're as follows, right? So basically four major ways that children develop through and become social subjects, right? So the first one is imitation, right? Basically imitation, this is like the first stage in that happens in infancy, is you get kind of direct copying, particularly of things like speech and talking, right? It's an imitation of the significant others, typically a person's parents or caregivers, and things like talking, right? So if you've ever been around a baby, right? Babies, when they get to a certain age, probably around 6 months, they can't talk. Um, Except my daughter, who learned to speak at 6 months. And since then, it's been an exhausting string of words for the next 13 and a half years, but that's neither here nor there. Um, she's recently discovered swearing. Super fun. Um, but right, they babble, right? Babies babble. They babble, babble, babble. They're trying to imitate the sounds, right, that their parents are making. And if you've ever been around a baby, right, you can have like quasi conversations with babies where they learn things like turn taking in conversation, right? So you talk to them, and then when you stop, they'll be like blah, 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 and then they stop and wait for your response, right? They didn't say anything, but they're learning kind of talking, right? That sounds make meaning, Um, and they're learning things like turn taking, right? That you talk, then I talk, then you talk, then I talk, right? This is the imitation stage, right? They learn kind of basic norms of socialization in these kinds of moments, right? Or, things like shouting, right? When they're angry, they get louder and they make more shouty sounds. When they're happy, they make happier sounds, right? All of this, not natural according to Mead, but is formed in that first stage of the formation of the self, of imitating people in general terms. Okay, in the second stage, right? And usually, you're getting this once they're a toddler, right? And they can talk a little bit. You get basically pretending, right? So that's what I've got, in the picture here. Oops, I switched slides and I did not mean to do that. Pretending, right? Things like playing house, playing school, playing doctor, pretending to be the vet or whatever it happens to be. This is a stage at which they take on simple imitative roles, right? So basically, a little bit more complex than just like copying speech and turn taking, right? They start to pretend that they're taking on roles, right? They start to care for a doll or a dog or, play the construction site. They're a police officer and you're getting arrested and these kinds of things, right? Um, that's at the pretending stage, right? So basically, they start to take on what they see as adult roles and what they've been introduced to, either directly or through things like the media, and imitate those things, right? Like I said, any kind of thing, firefighter, nurse, doctor, mommy, right? Playing house, all of these things are in that pretending stage. Playing complex games, right? So typically, this happens when they start to play sports, right, is playing more complex kind of games where they're keeping track of multiple roles at once and possibly switching roles in the course of the game, right? So like if you teach kids to play hockey, right, at first they all just chase the puck around, but then eventually like you segment them in, it's like, okay, now you're on offense, now you're on defense. They start to take on multiple roles. The other kind of way that this happens is when they start to play complex games where they themselves are taking on multiple roles at once. So instead of, and this happens probably around 4 or 5 years old, right? Now they're playing with 5 different My Little Ponies or a policeman and a bunch of bad guys, and they're taking on the roles of all of them, right? So they play these kinds of imaginative games where they take on a bunch of different roles at the same time, right? Okay, so that's playing complex games. And then develop the last one, right? And again, this starts to happen in early childhood, like probably as you get into like 5, 6, and then it's going to continue through into late childhood, early adolescence. Is the developing sense of cultural standards, right? So you develop, according to Mead, a sense of the generalized other, right? So what is the generalized other? It's a kind of sense of what the social rules are for most people, right? So you create this sense, what are the cultural standards? How are most people going to react if I do certain things? What are the general rules for most people? And then from that, you get a sense of the general cultural standards, right? And you start to apply them to yourself so that you yourself sort of, start to act in a way that's acceptable to most people, right? Like I said, this starts probably about, preschool, kindergarten, and will continue through, into adolescence and probably beyond. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, social roles change as we go through life, right? And a lot of the roles that you take on, how you understand your place in society, how you set your norms and values, are broadly shaped by the unique slice of history that you happen to live in. I think it was, I know it's Marx that said it. Men make history, but not in conditions of their own choosing, right? So we are all making history in some way, but obviously we didn't get to choose the world or the place that we came into. So you make history, but not in conditions of your own choosing, right? So your particular slice of the universe, of time and space, you live through it and it shapes you and you shape it, but you didn't get to choose it. And success and failure occur in part, right, because of circumstances beyond our control, right? Because you don't get to choose where and when you're born. Maybe you're born in a lucky generation. I think I just launched something. Um, maybe you're born in a lucky generation. Like the millennials in a sense are somewhat more lucky. We started coming into the housing market when things were relatively cheap, or maybe you're Gen Z and you come into the housing market when things are very expensive, right? Maybe you come in during an economic boom or an economic bust, right? All of these things are entirely beyond your control as an individual. Okay, the life course, right? There are distinct phases of life that we all pass through. And at each of these stages, we're socialized to do different things, right? When you become a parent, you're socialized differently. When you become a grandparent or you retire, your socialization again is different. And yeah, they're going to vary broadly from society to society and from historical period to historical period, right? Things are not the same for you as they were for your grandparents, and your children will look back at you as some, trust me, as some sort of pre-technological beings. I think for the first time ever, one of my kids was like, "Well, when you were growing up, you didn't have technology," which I was like, I mean, we had cars and computers, and yeah, but like not really technology, like not the internet or anything. Like, okay, what a weird thing to say. We had the internet. I'm a millennial, dear God. Okay, so rites of passage. Um, Basically, rites of passage are typically cultural ceremonies that mark a transition from one stage of life to a next. And you can kind of split them into three phases. And these often kind of help us navigate our place in the life course, right? Because when you move from one part of the life course to another, you often go through some kind of rite of passage, something that's been set up by your community in order to, help you along that path, right? To guide you or to grant you entrance into part of society that you weren't granted access to before. Okay, so we can talk about a few different kinds of rites of passage, right? So you can think of, the traditional ones, right? Things like baptisms, confirmations, weddings, funerals. Okay, so three kinds of rites of passage. Rites of separation, right? So things like um, moments where you become something different, right? Where you basically separate from one phase of life into another. So birth, right, is the first one. But then, um, some cultures you don't see it as much anymore. It's certainly in Western society, but had these sorts of rites of separation. Um, you know, like transition from childhood to adulthood, right? And I guess you still see it, say, like in Jewish culture, you would have like a bar mitzvah, right, as a kind of transition from being a child to being, essentially someone who is more or less the age of majority. And that's these kinds of rites of separation, right? You're leaving one phase of life and entering another, right? Marriage typically has been another one like this, right? Where, you would be leaving your parents' household and forming your own household, or if you want to talk historical terms and you're a woman, you would have been leaving your parents' household and joining the household of your husband, right, and his family, that kind of thing. Okay, so rites of transition. Rites of transition, learning appropriate behaviors for a new phase of life that's being entered. I think of these kind of as something like the modern baby shower, right? The modern baby shower is sort of a rite of transition where people are transitioned into the role of parents, right? They're given a bunch of gifts and typically a lot of advice about how to be parents and transitioned into this new life phase. And yeah, rites of incorporation, right? Are generally ceremonies where you're formally admitted into a new role. Not everybody goes through rites of incorporation, but let's say like when my former boss, who's now the president of St. Joseph's College, right, which is on campus here, Sean Flynn, really great guy, gave me amazing opportunities early in my career. Can't say enough nice things about him, right? So when he became president of St. Joseph's College, they did it because it's a Catholic college. They did a big mass with the Archbishop, and he took off his professor's robes, right? Because he got his PhD. And if you want to talk to him, he'll tell you in about 5 minutes that he went to University of Toronto. Why, I don't know, but he just feels it necessary to drop it into almost every conversation. When I was doing my biblical studies degree at University of Toronto, it's like, yes, Sean, we're friends. I know where you went to school. Please stop. like University of Toronto is so impressive. It's like, oh yeah, well it's not Harvard, you jerk. I think it's just to rub it in my face that I did my PhD here. It's like, yes, that's university. I'm like, shut up. Okay, but when he was, he took off his University of Toronto professor's robes and he put on the robes of the president of St. Joseph's College, right? Which is cool. I didn't know there was such a thing, but apparently there is. And this is a kind of incorporation, right? He's formally admitted to that role of president of the college. Same thing, I guess, when you go and you do your PhD, right? You get your formal robes, right? You get your professor's robes, and they're very special robes that you're supposed to keep with you. Because anytime you do a formal professor thing, like you go to convocation, you're supposed to wear the robes of the school that you went to, right? Now, as it turns out, U of A's robes are lame and don't have a special hat, which is always something I'm going to be bitter about. U of C has a special hat, and I'm sad about it. Anyway, this is a ritual of incorporation, right? Where you're formally admitted. You get your special robes and you become one of the PhDs, right? Or whatever it happens to be, right? If you were, joining a secret society, you would become a member of that secret society through some visible symbol. I guess like biker gangs. Oh, I should have led with biker gangs, not professors. Biker gangs are so much cooler. But it's similar, right? Let's say you wanted to join the Hells Angels, right? You start as a no patch member, right? So you get a leather jacket that doesn't have the big patch on the back, right? It has the name, it says Hells Angels Edmonton, Alberta, but it's not until you are fully a member of the Hells Angels that so if you've ever heard in the media, this person was a full patch member of the Hells Angels, that means they've gone through a ritual of incorporation, right? Where they received their jacket with the full patch on it, right? Because they now have been fully transitioned into a member of the Hells Angels. It usually involves committing some kind of crime. The more violent the crime, the better when it comes to the Hells Angels. Yes, so when you get your full jacket, that's when you become a full Hells Angel. Let's stop here. Dang it, a question. Sorry. So the I is naturally developed with the me is developing through language interaction with others. You've got it exactly. Perfect. That was an easy question. All right, let's leave it there. We got 2 minutes left, but not enough time to start this. So we'll pick this up next time. All right, we'll see you on Monday.